Have you ever needed to stick a 2D mouth on a 3D head? It's something that happens to me way too often. Like lots of clients want that sort of style where we've got a 3D character but 2D mouth shapes that can be switched, and it's a pain in the arse to rig. It's quite tricky. It's got some little finicky bits which will just trip you up and make you scream. So I'm here to take some of the pain out of that and show you just how I go about doing it. I've had to do this on numerous jobs for numerous clients, including Sinking Feeling, the award-winning short by Blue Zoo. Saving Soup, the absolutely totally unknown kids show by Gwen Austin Studios, lots of stuff with Poke Studio, lots of stuff with commercial clients. It's a technique that just I keep using again and again and again. So here it is, how to do 2D mouth shapes on a 3D head. Let's go. What you're going to need for this is an image with a grid of mouth shapes on it. So evenly spaced out, all the different mouth shapes you want to use in a grid, in a single image with alpha. Yeah, so where the mouth shape isn't, you want there to be nothing and it to be transparent. So, you know, PNG, TIFF, that'll do the job. And what we're going to do is first we're going to create our mouth plane. So I'm going to go onto my head shape. I'm just going to use C in edit mode to paint a selection. That looks pretty good to me. And I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. And as you can see, once we hit Shift D, it automatically starts to transform. It starts to move with us. So we're going to hit Escape to cancel that because we want it to stay in the same place. Hit P to separate the selection out. And then we'll tab into object mode and we now have a separate object with that mouth plane on. And we'll call it mouth plane. And it helps when you can spell, but there we go. Then I'm going to go into edit mode with the mouth plane. I'm going to take a big hard look at it, and yeah, from the front orthographic camera I'm going to hit U, project from view, and that will reproject our UVs, and I'm going to select those UVs and I'm going to position them over our first mouth shape. Now we need to put together a shader, so I'm going to delete the shaders that were on here, create a new one, call it mouth plane. And I'm going to create a new image node to go into this. I've got Node Wrangler enabled in my add-ons. Node Wrangler, so just tick that box in your add-ons. And then when we select the Principled BSDF shader, I can hit Control T and it will do a little image texture setup for me, nice and fast. You could do that manually as well, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to choose the robber's mouth image. Robber's mouth is such an unusual phrase. It sounds like such a wonderful insult. Ah, she's got a robber's mouth, she has, son. Right, robber's mouth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the alpha of the robber's mouth into the alpha of the BSDF. And we can see that starts to change here. But because we're in Eevee, we need to go that one extra step, set our blend mode to alpha hashed and our shadow mode to none. Now, there's a reason that it still doesn't look right. And that's because it's Z-fighting with the mesh underneath it. So we're going to add a shrink wrap modifier to this and shrink wrap it to the head, target normal project, above surface, and then just dial up the offset ever so slightly. And that will just keep it just above the surface. But also when we rig, you know, when you rig this, I'm probably not going to show this in this tutorial, but you know, we're going to give this but I'm probably not going to show this in this tutorial, but you might want to like add a head bone and add a bone for the mouth and parent this mouth plane to that bone, and then when you move the bone around, the shrink wrap will take care of keeping it above the surface in a nice enough fashion, and that will give you lots of options, including, you know, scaling and rotating it and sliding it over the surface in a nice way. So that will give you a great deal more expression for your money. Now, with that said, this is the tricky bit, and I hate this bit. It's not easy to do. It's fiddly as hell, but it is necessary. So I'm going to add an armature, and I'm going to rotate that on the X minus 90 so that it's facing the world origins. And this is vital, this is really important. The bone orientation and how they relate to these two bones will relate to one another is everything about how it works. And I've just done that in pose mode like an idiot, so I'm going to clear those transformations if I can. Alt SRG. Why is it not doing what I want it to? I'm going to delete this armature. I'm going to delete the armature and start again. I was going so poorly. So in edit mode, rotate X -90. There we go, that's working. And we're going to call this bone, we'll scale it down a bit, we'll call it frame. Again, helps to be able to spell in this game, or to type. Frame. And I'm going to duplicate that, Shift D, scale that up, call it picker. And what we're going to do is we are going to add a modifier to the mouth plane. We're going to call that modifier is going to be UV warp. We'll put it at the top of our stack. Choose our UV layer, or the UV map that we're using, and then object from is going to be the armature, and then the bone will be frame, and then object 2 is armature and picker. Obviously you can do this within another armature. I'm just keeping it separate to keep it simple, so you could do this as part of another armature system. Yeah, so essentially if I now move this bone, you can see that it's going to move the... Oh, this is actually in cycles. There we go, let's keep it on EV. I move the bone and the UVs move in relation to it. But the up and down isn't working. So we need to make a little bit of a change. Also, it's going back to front. It's moving the wrong way. So, yeah, we need to do some tweaks. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to go over to here, and I'm going to change the V, the axis V to axis Z, and hopefully that will do something. Yes, great. So now the up and down is working. I'm going to roll this bone, and actually you can't see what I've done there, so I'm going to go to the axes option and put the axes in the display so you can see these bones at axes, and I'm just going to roll that so it's the inverse, minus 180. So it's the inverse of the frame bone. So the frame is Z up and X positive, and this is X negative, Z negative. And what that's done is, unfortunately, it's flipped our UVs, but you can't see that because what you can only see your original UVs in the UV editor view. You can't see modified UVs unless you go over here and you tick modified edges, and you can see what's happened when I've rolled that bone. It has rolled the UVs around and flipped them. So what we need to do is go to this UV warp and scale, change both our scales to -1, and hopefully, fingers crossed, now it moves in the right direction on the horizontal and the vertical. Excellent. So we are 90% of the way there. But that is, it's seriously so fiddly to get that bone orientation right if you don't know what you're doing. So take your time with it, make sure it's working, and methodical. So we could do with some helpers now to make sure that we, when we're choosing our mouth shape, that it's a little easier than it currently is. So the first of our helpers is just going to be an empty. And we'll choose an image empty. You could just choose a plain axis and then go over to here, change that to image. And then we're going to choose the robber's mouth image. And you can see it's come in there. And what I'm going to do is rotate X -90. Oh, no, rotate X 180. There we go. Get it oriented correctly. I'm going to position it approximately the same position as the starting point for our UVs. And now, when I move this over the images, you're seeing that it's approximately lined up with them, and that gives us a fairly good preview of what we're getting. Now this is still very floaty and sort of like all over the place, and it's certainly not like snapping between them in a way that we would like it to work, or I would like it to work. So let's tackle that next. I'm going to create an object, Shift A, I'm going to create a plane, and I'm going to scale that plane down. And actually I'm going to turn on in front for this object. Maybe I'll rotate it on the X, 90, there we go. So we've got this little plane. And we are going to want to scale that till it's tiny, but for now, just so we can see it, let's keep it to a reasonable size. We're going to add an array modifier, turn off the relative offset, turn on constant offset, dial it up to 4, and we're just going to slide on the X until one of these dots is in each of our face shapes. You can see that they're maybe not most perfectly spaced sort of in how these have been positioned, but they will suffice. And then I'm going to duplicate this array and change the X to Z and just scale it down. So again, we're creating a grid. Yeah. Now we can see all of those roughly in the right sort of place, and God, this armature is right in my face, isn't it? Let's make sure that that is on wire and in front, so we can see things. Yeah, so I'm just going to position this as best as I can. That seems to be about right. And then I'm going to scale, and we don't want it just to be a single vert. We just want them to be scaled down so they're basically in the same space, because it does need to have a face, I'm afraid. I think it does anyway. Because we're going to use that plane, which we should now call snapping grid. And we might as well rename the image empty, mouth gallery. We're going to take our snapping grid and make it useful. So we're going to go to our pick a bone, in object mode, add bone constraint, shrink wrap, and point it towards the snapping grid. And hopefully, now you can see it will snap between those points we've made. Very useful. So we've got this perfect little helper. What we need to do from here, we don't need to do, but I recommend you do, is go into your snapping grid and reposition. Go into the snapping grid, I apologize, and apply your modifiers. Then reposition each of these points so that they're basically perfect for, perfectly positioned. So this is the current mouth shape we're on. I'm going to hit A to deselect everything, B to box select, G to move it around, and we can change the positioning. I'm going to actually turn X-ray on and box select because it didn't select everything there. I'm just going to move it around, and I can finesse the positioning per mouth shape however I need. So I'm going to move on to this mouth shape now. Snapping grid, double A to deselect all, B to box select, G, just move it around and get that positioning right. So there we go. So that's all working. So now what we need to do is take our snapping grid and our mouth gallery, and we are going to parent them to the frame bone. So we move the frame, it all moves with. Actually, this isn't parented to the frame bone, and it does need to be, so parent, keep offset. Now we move the frame bone, the whole thing moves around. In fact, we should be able to scale it, and it doesn't affect the behavior. So now we've got this pane we can move around willy-nilly and get the same behavior, because the scale is operating on the frame bone, not on the on this bone. Although if you do scale that, it does have an effect. So I probably wouldn't scale that. I would be more inclined to scale a bone attached to this plane instead for that sort of action. Anyway, I'm waffling now, so what I need to do is not waffle and just tidy this up a little bit. So I tend to have an asset browser full of bone shapes, which I find very useful. Oh, where's that gone? Yeah, so I've got all these bone shapes which I can use, but I keep meaning to release them on the Blender Market because it's such a useful thing to have. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a plane and delete the faces, and I'll call that BS square. And I'll move that into a collection called BS for bone shapes and bullshit. And what I can do now is select my bone for the frame bone, in object mode, custom object, BS square. And then I can rotate it, translate it, and scale it doing a terrible job of this. Lovely. Okay, to something like that. And then same for this, we're going to go BS square. Rotate it. And this time we'll scale it down. Great. And turn off those axes. And now we have a perfect little mouth shape picker thing. But it works pretty well, and yeah, I like it. But it's as I said, it's a pain to set up. If you're having any problems with it, if like the just bear with me 1 second. Let's turn off the selectability for some of these objects. So I'm going to put these into my, yeah, these are already in my rig folder. I'm just going to turn off selectability for them because I don't want to accidentally be selecting those and changing them. We can also turn off renderability, not that it's going to do anything. Snapping grid might. In fact, we'll turn off the entire visibility of the snapping grid. And yeah, it should still all work. So that's it. I hope it was useful. Do the usual, like, subscribe, follow for more, and hopefully I'll see you next time.